The message didn't just appear, it landed like a reminder of everything that had been missing. At exactly 3:47 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday, my phone lit up. It was from my father. Family dinner tonight. 7 p.m. sharp, important discussion. Don't be late. I stared at the screen for a long moment and then a slow, cold smile touched my lips. Not the kind that comes from happiness, but the kind that comes from finally understanding something clearly. 8 months. That's how long it had been since I heard anything from them. No calls, no messages. No, how are you? Just silence. 8 months since I stood alone at my graduation, scanning a crowded room filled with proud families, searching for faces that never appeared. I had checked my phone again and again, hoping for a message. We're here, we're on the way, anything. Nothing ever came. They had been too busy that day. But now? Now there was an important discussion. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Instead, I picked up my keys, already knowing exactly what this was about. And before I tell you what I brought with me to that dinner, drop a comment and tell me, what's the longest you've ever gone without speaking to a family member? Because I want to know if I'm the only one who understands just how loud silence can become. I didn't take my own car. Driving up in a luxury SUV would have been a mistake. It would have revealed too much too soon. It would have given them information before I was ready to use it, so I chose something else, a rented, sedan gray, plain, forgettable, the kind of car no one looks at. Twice. Perfect camouflage. As I drove up the long, winding road toward the estate, the sun was setting behind the hills, casting everything in shades of orange and gold. From a distance, the place still looked perfect, like something out of a magazine. Old money, stability, legacy, but distance hides truth. The closer I got, the more everything began to shift. The white paint on the gate was peeling, exposing rust underneath. The gravel on the driveway had thinned out, leaving patches of uneven dirt. And the vineyard, that's where the real story was. The leaves weren't healthy. They looked dry, fragile. Growth was uneven, stunted. Even without being an expert, I knew what I was seeing. This wasn't just a bad season. This was neglect. The vineyard wasn't struggling. It was failing, and in that moment, everything made sense. My father hadn't invited me because he missed me. He had invited me because he needed me. I parked my car at the far edge of the circular driveway, away from the others. I didn't want attention, not yet. For a second, I checked my reflection in the mirror. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor except myself. Because I wasn't the same person who had once stood on that stage, hoping they would show up. I wasn't here to be accepted anymore. I was here for something else. And as I stepped out of the car, something shifted inside me. For most of my life, I had looked at my family through emotion, love, hurt, rejection, longing. I thought those things explained their behavior, but I was wrong. They didn't operate on emotion. They operated on value. In their world, everything was an investment, and I had never been one worth keeping. I was quiet, focused, independent. I didn't bring them attention or status the way my sister Olivia did with her beauty and image. I didn't charm people the way my brother Joshua could. I didn't give them quick returns, so they stopped investing in me. It wasn't personal to them, it was strategy. They let me go because they didn't see potential. But now everything had changed. The asset they ignored had grown beyond anything they imagined, and their own empire was falling apart. They weren't calling me back because they cared. They were calling me back because they needed to buy back. And understanding that didn't erase the pain, but it did give me something better: control. I picked up my leather portfolio, stepped out into the cool evening air, and walked toward the house. I didn't knock. I walked in like I belonged there, because I did. The dining room smelled rich and heavy, filled with expensive food and something else beneath it. Something stale. My mother rushed toward me the second I entered, her arms wide open, her smile perfectly practiced. "Jasmine, look at you. We missed you so much, darling." Her hug was light and quick, more performance than affection. I didn't hug her back. I just stood there and let the moment pass. "You look tired," Olivia said from her chair, slowly swirling her wine. "Is that hotel job wearing you down?" It was a familiar move, an insult dressed like concern. She needed me to be struggling. She needed that version of me to exist, because if I wasn't struggling, then her own situation didn't look so good anymore. Something like that, I said calmly, taking my seat. I didn't correct her. I didn't mention the awards, or the features, or the success she couldn't even imagine. I let them sit comfortably inside their version of reality. Just a little longer. The table was set with their best dishes, the ones reserved for important guests. My father sat at the head, looking composed and in control, but I noticed the small details. The wear on his cuffs. The tension in his posture. To family, he said. Raising his glass, we all followed. The sound of crystal clinking echoed through the room, hollow and empty. As I took a sip of water, my mother began talking about events, parties, appearances, anything except me. We missed you, she added lightly, almost as an afterthought. I glanced at the empty chair beside me, but in my mind, it wasn't empty. I saw myself sitting there, younger, wearing a graduation gown, holding a phone, waiting, checking every few seconds for a message that never came. I remembered walking across that stage, hearing strangers clap while the people I needed most were somewhere else celebrating something they thought mattered more. That version of me looked at me, now, hurt, hopeful, still wanting their love. And in that moment, I felt something rise inside me, not sadness, not anymore, something stronger. I wasn't here for them. I was here for her. I placed my glass down gently, the sound cutting through the room. Dad, I said, my voice steady. Your message said this was important. Let's skip everything else. Why am I really here? The room changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. My father leaned back slightly, completely calm. We have a situation, he began. A temporary issue. The drought has affected production. The bank isn't cooperating. He paused, waiting, expecting sympathy. I gave him none. There's an opportunity, he continued. The neighboring estate, Silver Creek, is selling their water rights. If we secure them, we stabilize everything, expand, grow, and? I asked. We need capital, Uncle Robert added smoothly. $1 million. Immediately. They said it like it was nothing, like they were asking for a small favor. Not a fortune, not a demand. A demand disguised as expectation. We know you've done. Fine, my father said dismissively. It's time you contribute to something that actually matters. This family. This legacy. Duty, I repeated quietly. The word felt empty. You owe us, Olivia added sharply. You didn't build your life alone. You have our name, our connections. Exactly, Robert said. Your success comes from this family. It's only fair that it comes back. I looked around the table. They weren't asking. They were collecting. They believed everything I had built belonged to them, that my success was theirs to claim, that my effort, my struggle, my sleepless nights were just extensions of their own story, and sitting there in the center of the table was the bottle I had brought, a simple gift, unopened, unnoticed. They hadn't even looked at it, because they weren't paying attention to anything except what they thought they could take. So, my father said, folding his hands, we need the money by tomorrow. The water rights were already sold, but we'll make a better offer. Push them out. Push them out, I repeated softly. That's business, he said with a small smile. You'll understand eventually. I already do, I replied. I reached down and picked up my portfolio, not for a check, but for something else. I placed my napkin down carefully, even though I hadn't touched the food. Then I opened the portfolio. The zipper sound cut through the silence like something sharp. You're right, I said calmly. Business is business. I pulled out the documents. And in business, before making any investment, you do your research. The first set of papers slid across the table. Uncle Robert picked them up, and for the first time that night, his expression broke. It was a forensic audit of his financial management over the last 5 years. You said the bank was being unreasonable, I continued, smoothing the paper with my hand. But according to these filings, the bank has been incredibly patient. You've leveraged this estate 3 times to cover bad investments in cryptocurrency and offshore gambling debts. You're not liquid, Robert. You're insolvent. That's private information, Robert sputtered, reaching to cover the documents. Where did you get this? Public records and a very good private investigator, I replied calmly. You don't need $1 million for water rights. You need it to pay off the balloon payment on the second mortgage that Dad doesn't know you took out. My father's head whipped around to look at his brother. I didn't let them argue. I wasn't done. The second stack of documents hit the table next. Glossy high-defin brochures and financial statements bound in heavy cardstock. I placed them in the center directly over the untouched appetizers. And regarding my little hotel job, I said, looking at Olivia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I flipped open the brochure. It featured a sweeping aerial shot of a cliffside resort in Bali, architectural marvels woven into the jungle canopy. The logo was embossed in gold. The Jasmine Collective. I don't work for a hotel chain, I said. I own the chain. 12 luxury eco-resorts across 4 continents. We specialize in sustainable luxury and high-net-worth privacy. I slid the valuation report toward my father. His eyes scanned the bottom line, widening until I thought they might pop. Last quarter, my company was valued at $56.5 million, I stated, the numbers rolling off my tongue with cool precision. I didn't get there because of your name, Dad. In fact, I built it under a shell company so no one would associate my brand with your failing reputation. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. Joshua looked at me as if I had just grown a second head. Olivia was staring at the brochure, her mouth slightly open, realizing the cute hobby she'd mocked was an empire she could never afford to visit. So no, I said, closing the portfolio. I won't be investing in this vineyard. Not because I can't afford it, but because I don't invest in sinking ships. And I certainly don't pay dividends on good genes that never taught me anything other than how to survive neglect. Wait, James said, his voice trembling slightly. He wasn't angry anymore. He was panicked. The bluster had deflated, leaving behind a desperate old man. Jasmine, be reasonable. $56 million. If you have that kind of capital, then $1 million is nothing to you. It's pocket change. We're talking about saving the family land. If we don't get those water rights, the vines die, the legacy dies. I know, I said. That's why I didn't come here to invest. I reached for the bottle of wine sitting in the center of the table, the one I had brought, the one they had ignored. I picked it up and held it out to my father. Read the label. Dad. He took it, confused. He squinted at the elegant calligraphy on the front. Silver Creek Estate. Reserve Cabernet 2018. He looked up, bewildered. I don't understand. This is from next door. Why are you showing me this? Keep reading, I said. Look at the bottom. The proprietor's name. He looked closer. His breath hitched. The bottle slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a heavy thud, though it didn't break. He stared at me, his face draining of color. Proprietor J. Jasmine, he whispered. I didn't come here to help you bid on Silver Creek, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. I bought Silver Creek 2 days ago. $41 million cash. You bought it? Angela gasped, clutching her pearls. You own the water. I own the land. I own the vines. And yes, most importantly, I own the senior water rights for this entire valley, I confirmed. The auction you were planning to bully your way into it never happened. I made a preemptive offer they couldn't refuse. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. I wasn't just a rich daughter they could guilt trip. I was their neighbor. I was their competition. And I held the only resource that could keep them alive. But why? Olivia asked, her voice shrill. Why would you buy that dump next door? Do you remember where I wanted my graduation party, Olivia? I asked. She blinked. What? 8 years ago, I said. I begged Mom and Dad to let me have a small party at the Silver Creek barn. It was beautiful. It was simple. And you told me, Dad, that it was too expensive for a party nobody would come to. You said we couldn't afford to waste money on my vanity. I leaned forward. I bought it because I could, and because now I own the venue where you refused to celebrate me. I own the memory you tried to ruin. The room was silent. The power had shifted so completely that the air felt thin. They weren't looking at a family member anymore. They were looking at the landlord of their fate. So, James said, his voice cracking, the transformation was complete. The arrogant patriarch had dissolved, replaced by a beggar in a tailored suit. You control the water. Then we can work this out. A family rate, an easement. You can divert the flow to our irrigation channels. We can pay you back over time. Please, Jasmine, Angela added, tears finally spilling over real tears this time, fueled by the terrifying prospect of poverty. We made mistakes. We admit that. But you can't just let the vineyard die. It's your home. I looked at them, huddling together in the wreckage of their own ego. They still thought this was a negotiation. They still thought there was a price tag on my compliance. I'm afraid that doesn't fit my business model, I said, zipping up my portfolio. The Jasmine Collective is built on sustainability. My plan for Silver Creek isn't agriculture, it's restoration. I'm reeing the stream. I'm taking down the dams and letting the water flow back into the natural ecosystem. But, Joshua stammered, his face pale, if you don't divert the water to us, our vines will dry out in a month. Yes, I said simply, they will. You're destroying us, Uncle Robert shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You're bankrupting your own flesh and blood. No, I corrected him, turning toward the door. I'm just declining to subsidize a failing business. You taught me that, Dad, never throw good money after bad. And frankly, your vineyard is a very bad investment. I walked out of the dining room. Behind me, the shouting started. Dad yelling at Robert, Olivia sobbing, Angela calling my name. It sounded like a riot in a library. I walked through the foyer, past the portraits of ancestors who would have been ashamed of them, and opened the heavy oak door. The night air was cool and clean. I walked to my rental car, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled down the driveway, my phone on the passenger seat lit up. Dad calling, Mom calling, text from Olivia. You text from Robert. We can sue. I didn't block them. I just turned the phone face down. I waited for the surge of triumph. I waited for the rush of adrenaline, the vindication, the gotcha moment I had fantasized about for years. But as I turned onto the main highway, leaving the dying vineyard in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. And that was the greatest luxury of all. Hate requires energy. It requires you to care about the person hurting you. But I had moved past hate. I had reached the altitude of indifference. They were no longer monsters under my bed or giants I had to slay. They were just people, small, bad at business, insignificant people who used to know me. I rolled down the window and let the wind rush in. I was driving toward my new estate, toward the water I owned, toward a future I had built with my own hands. The silence in the car wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. If you've ever had to outgrow people who were supposed to grow with you, share this story and hit that subscribe button because next week we're talking about what happens when they try to come crawling back.